Hey guys, what's going on? Bill Amadeo here. Today I was asked to talk about the topic of false confessions. And this is a topic that I've been studying for a long time. I have this issue come up all the time in criminal cases. And it's been something since my law school days at the Innocence Project I've been reviewing. And it's the confession is something that is used by police all the time. And the question is, how did the police arrive at that confession? I could tell you that when Nick Sanderson and I work on a case together, the first thing Nick asks the client is, okay, was there a confession? Or how many confessions did you make? And if there's a confession, we know that's where our research starts. If there's not a confession, we always feel we're going to win the case without the confession. With the confession, we still feel confident, but it makes things a lot more difficult. And from a layperson's perspective, people often ask, why would anybody make a confession? We're going to talk about that today. And I'll start a little bit about my time at the Innocence Project. And the blogger for Grable and Associates wrote a really good blog today. I provided some insight on the blog along with a few other lawyers, but I'm going to get into more detail in this video. And we start talking about false confessions. I go back to my time at the Innocence Project at Cooley, and we had to read a book about all these different confessions that come into play. At this time, which is about 2006, I'm not really thinking I want to do criminal law. I'm more the civil litigation track. And the Innocence Project really brought a lot of things to light for me. And it kind of changed my whole career. And I read about a guy named Ron Williamson. And Ron was a man from Oklahoma who was an amazing baseball player. And he was drafted in the second round by the Oakland A's. And Ron Williamson was known as the next Mickey Mantle. Just a great player. And he's from Oklahoma, which the Mick was also from. And they basically became friends. And Williamson tore it up in high school. He gets drafted. And then he suffered an arm injury. And in essence, his baseball career was throttled. And Ron had a lot of mental issues from that point. Great deal of depression, and he was kind of a drifter. But he wasn't a criminal, he was a drifter. And a young woman got killed near his hometown, and because Ron was a drifter, the police basically made him a top suspect. What's up, Nick? And Ron, he denied it at first. The police actually wrote a statement, made him sign it, and Ron Williamson ended up in prison for a long time. Eventually, with technology and DNA, it wasn't Ron Williamson. The police preyed on somebody who had issues with mental capacity. And we see this happen all the time because the reality is this. If the police get a confession, they feel they have a rock solid case. We see a lot of shortcuts done in police investigations. Anybody that knows me knows I come from a long line of law enforcement. 16:30. Come from a long line of law enforcement, and the reality is I have a lot of respect for the badge. But I also think we have a problem when that power is abused. In the Ron Williamson case, you might think, well, there's an isolated incident. We move forward in time, we see things like the Brendan Dassey case. Why Brendan is in prison and why the governor of Wisconsin hasn't done more to help that young man, it's a tragedy. We see the West Memphis Three, and I've written a lot of stuff about that. Jesse Miskelly was a mentally challenged young man. He was actually at a wrestling event when 3 children were killed. Jason Baldwin was in school, and there was actually proof that Jason Baldwin was in school when these 3 children were killed. But the police surrounded Jesse Miskelly, and despite all the evidence that Jesse, Jason, and Damian Eccles were not near these children when they got killed, Jesse made a confession. If it wasn't for HBO and all their specials they did on the West Memphis Three, they'd probably still be in prison today. The West Memphis Three took an Alford plea. I won't bore you with that right now. That's a conversation for another time. And then we see the Central Park Five. The reality, you guys, is that we see a lot of situations where people make false confessions. The stats are shocking. 75% of the time, when there is a confession that's been proven to be false, the defendant still ends up getting convicted. 15% of exonerated defendants at the University of Michigan, the exoneration database, 15% of those are from false confessions. And with COVID-19, we're seeing more and more false confessions. There's a belief right now that if you tell the police what they're asking and what they allegedly want to hear, you're going to go easy on you. Actually, nothing could be further from the truth. So a lot of criminal defense lawyers will tell you, I don't ever let my clients talk to the police. I don't abide by that. I'm certainly willing to have my client talk to the police, but I got to be present. And if I think the officer's going too far, I'll shut it down. That way it shows the prosecutor a couple things. Number one, the defendant actually did talk to the police. And number two, they're represented by competent counsel. That's one way to protect yourself. The biggest thing I want you to think about is I don't want you ever talking to the cops by yourself. I don't care what the situation is. The police are not there to be your friend. They're probably there to get a confession. And the way they get a confession, the reason why Brendan Dassey's in prison right now, the reason why the West Memphis Three suffered for as long as they did, is because we were violating something called the Reed technique. The Reed technique is a tool used by officers, and it's really used in Michigan more than most other states. The Reed technique has a 9-step process. And I won't bore you with all the details. If you want to read the blog, it's in there. But here's basically a synopsis of the Reed technique, rather than go through every step. The Reed technique is going to try to shift blame. It's going to try to make the officer feel like they are your friend. And then, once that happens, the police, if they think they have a defendant that committed a crime, they're going to try to lead you into a confession. Every time you are interrogated by the police, there's one agenda: to get a confession. Makes their job easier. Okay. I think this is a time period when prosecutors and defense lawyers need to work together. I think we need to work with the police. I think we need to be a team as much as we can, but we also need to protect ourselves. And if you go talk to the police without competent counsel, you're asking for a mistake. And the mistake could be tragic, could end up being life in prison. There's a theme out there And the theme is, why would anybody make a false confession? Now, here's the deal on that. There's really three reasons. The first, more than the three reasons, I guess we should say. There's three reasons emotionally why somebody would make a false confession, but they're the old school way was that the officer maybe used physical coercion. If there's not physical coercion, you can ask yourself, well, why would the police try to get a confession from someone they didn't believe was guilty? Well, the officer may be good intent. They may believe the guy was guilty. Your next question would be, why would a defendant ever confess to something they didn't do? Well, there's three reasons in no particular order. Number one, a lot of defendants think if I just tell the officer what they want to hear, I could go home. A lot of times the police will tell the defendant they could go home if they just tell them what they need to hear. You may go home that day, but they're going to get a warrant for you. Nothing good can happen from making a confession in your criminal case. So when somebody says, I told the police what they wanted to hear so I could go home, that's a technique. And you know what's really unfair, guys? The police can lie during their investigation. But yet if you lie, they're going to use that against you. So it's not an even playing field. Let's be clear on that. But one of the reasons is people think, hey, I'll get to go home if I just tell the officer what they want to hear. Number two, and we see this a lot with people with low mental capacity, the most vulnerable, and they get taken advantage of all the time, is they feel important. The officer will make them feel like they're empowered if they tell this confession. That's terrifying. But it's reality. And the third reason, which makes sense when you really think about it, is that somebody will give a confession to protect a loved one. The feeling is, I rather go to prison than my loved one go to prison, aka take the rap for someone. We're in a tough time right now. I think COVID-19 is putting everybody on edge. People are scared. People are buying into conspiracy theories. The political half circles at odds with each other. We don't know when we're going to be back to normal business. Jury trials may not happen for months. Frank Murphy, a couple judges put out memos that it's going to be several months before a jury trial. It's a lot of defendants out there that do not know what their future is. And I had a professor in law school, and she told me three things. There's three things an individual wants in the criminal justice system. And this has always stuck with me. The three things are, number one, I want to have their story told. Number two, they want to be vindicated. They want to be proved that their story was correct. And number three, they want to get this damn thing over with. A lot of anxiety that goes into our profession. You could see how those three things in a false confession can become a very convoluted situation. So, the blog talks about a lot of things. We went into some more details today. The blogger, when she published it, she got some really good quotes from different lawyers. Nancy Gordon, great lawyer in Lenawee, does a lot of estate planning, really good criminal lawyer. My friend Joe Brugnoli added some insight. Whenever Joe Brugnoli gives commentary, you really need to pay attention to it because he was a police officer and now he is on the defense side, so he sees it from both ends. One thing that was also mentioned in the blog, and Scott Grable mentioned this, was about having clients take an Andy Lunguski test. I'm just going to mention Detective Lunguski right now. Detective Lunguski ran the Michigan State Police Polygraph Unit for a long time. It's one of the most knowledgeable people I know on polygraphs. That's who I use when I want a private polygraph done. And with a false confession, one of the things you want to do is have a really good private polygraph in place. No matter what people say, guilty people do not pass polygraphs. You should do that private polygraph with somebody like Detective Lunguski because nobody's going to fake that. If you pass his private poly, you need to show that to the prosecutor. You need to start arguing for your false confession. And then you need to request a state test. It's a lot that goes into that. Polygraphs is going to be, we'll do another video on that in time. But I'm a firm believer in polygraphs. I know not all lawyers are, but you got nothing to lose with the private polygraph. If your client passes it, use it as leverage. If your client fails it, you throw it in the trash. It remains confidential. So, big user of Andy Lunguski polygraphs. He definitely has helped a lot with my false confession cases. And he's taught me a lot about how the Michigan State Police Unit would examine a confession. There's a lot to learn, a lot more that goes in this video or goes to that blog. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But we do have a problem here. And the problem is false confessions are happening at a rapid pace. If you make a confession, you are asking to be incarcerated. Police want to talk to you, and you don't have a lawyer yet. You tell them the following: I'm invoking my right to remain silent. I'm invoking my right to counsel. Don't say another damn word, because what you did right there was you invoked your Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. If the officer proceeds and you continue to talk, they could argue that you waived your rights. There's nothing to be gained by talking to the police without your lawyer present, guys. When I started crim law, and one of the first lawyers I watched was my friend Robin Stevens, who is an amazing criminal defense lawyer. And Robin, you and I need to catch up. We've been Facebooking back and forth, but I learned a lot from watching her. And there's lawyers that are seasoned like Robin that could teach any young lawyer a lot of things. I've watched my friend Trovius Starr go to battle in Oakland County and Washtenaw County. And one thing that gets lost in this whole dynamic of the criminal justice system is that I've heard prosecutors constantly tell me, well, you can't prove your client's innocence. You remember who's got the burden of proof here? It's the prosecutor. We get lost in that shuffle. Okay, it is their case. We could sit there and read the newspaper during a trial. We would never recommend doing that, but literally, they have to prove their case. We don't. Some amazing prosecutors I know. Arian Slays taught me a lot. Scott Corner's brilliant out in Shiawassee because he's been on both sides of the coin. He's been a defense lawyer, now he's a prosecutor. I go on and on. There's a lot of prosecutors I have respect for. But in the game of criminal justice, it is their burden. Understand that. It's their burden to prove their case. It's not our burden to prove the client's innocence. We, and this is something Nick Sanders and I talk about all the time, one of our goals is always to go head first, be the bulldog on it, and prove the client's innocence. But that's not actually our job. We just go to a different level with those things. But the job is of the prosecutor to prove the case. If you want to help the prosecutor convict you, make a confession. It's not going to protect your interest. Telling the officer what they want to hear is not your ticket to freedom. Keeping your mouth shut, invoking your right to silence, invoking your right to counsel is your first step towards protecting your future. We will talk about the West Memphis 3 case and the Brendan Dassey case and polygraphs on other videos. And I'm sure there'll be some blogs about them. There are topics that have kind of shaped a lot of our careers. I know a lot of criminal defense lawyers my age, late 30s, early 40s, will tell you that one of the reasons they got into criminal defense work is because of the West Memphis 3 case. And the West Memphis 3 case, it basically encompasses what the false confession is all about. Well, I hope this vlog sheds some light on the issues of false confessions, where we are as a criminal justice system. And if you got questions, text me, DM me, whatever you need to do. Read that blog, do a little research on your own, and whether you're my client or you're on your own or you have another lawyer, always remember, you do not talk to the police without your counsel present. The police have a tough job, and I respect it, but they are not there to prove your innocence. They're there to get a conviction. Don't help them in that process. All right, guys, have a good one.